Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Dr. Tamara Lewis. I have a question for you. Are you prepared for learning? In today's legal skills classroom, we're often engaging in cooperative or collaborative learning. Cooperative and collaborative learning are an approach to learning that is very different from a traditional law school classroom. And therefore, in order to be prepared to learn, you have to understand the actual collaborative learning approach. The aim of this presentation is to explain the collaborative learning approach. First, by talking about collaborative learning roles. Second, by focusing on the relationship between the instructor and the learners. And thirdly, by looking at how the learning process is evaluated once it has occurred. In a collaborative classroom, one role that can be undertaken by the learners are the materials gatherer and observer. The timekeeper and agenda setter are also important. A facilitator is needed for the group. Reader and task monitors carry out an important role, as do recorders and speakers. Taking a look at each of these roles, I point out that the materials gatherer is going to take a look at what is necessary to carry out the tasks. And generally, the instructor will have those materials on hand, and they can be gathered by this materials gatherer and brought back to the group. But in other classrooms, there may be electronic or internet sites that have to be used, and it's important to make sure that all group members are aware of where to find those materials electronically. The materials gatherer then, once having gathered the materials, can take on an observer role in which he or she watches the process of the group to ensure that in fact the group has been carrying out the tasks that they're required to, and that they were very conscientious in the use of their time. And at the end of the time when reflection is being undertaken, it's the materials gatherer observer that's able to give feedback to the group to explain how the process may have been improved or in what ways they were actually successful in obtaining their goals. The timekeeper or the agenda setter takes a role in the beginning of a task and also throughout the task. They start off by making sure that the group understands the tasks that they've been assigned and that they break down the tasks into subtasks that have to be done. So for example, if you're being asked in your class to carry out an interview, what you might do is first say that the first thing to do is to divide up and decide who's going to play the client and who's going to play the lawyer. And then the next thing to do would be to actually carry out the interview with one person as client and one person as lawyer, and then switch roles. So you might have 3 different agenda items. The first one for just determining the group, and that might take 1 or 2 minutes. And you have a second agenda item where you allow the interview to take place, and that might take 5 or 10 minutes, and then another time when you switch roles and have another interview take place, and that could be 5 or 10 minutes. And the timekeeper would be responsible then to make sure to alert the group when the time is running out or they're coming toward the end of a task, so that the group can know to move on to the next task that they have. The facilitator is the person who actually facilitates the discussion. And in this role, the facilitator has to make sure that every agenda item that's on the agenda is covered, and that each of the people in the group is participating in either a discussion or in the activity that they have to carry out. And so the facilitator has to use that agenda that the agenda setter put together and make sure that they are covering the points in the agenda during the discussion. It's also useful in these groups to have a reader and task monitor. Often instructors are going to provide some sort of a handout or a task sheet, and it's important to have a reader maybe read aloud to the group what's in the task so that everyone knows what you're supposed to work on. And that person can also be responsible for clarifying any ideas as a task monitor. So they would be able to approach a teaching assistant or the instructors on the course to ask additional questions on behalf of the group if they're still not clear about what they're supposed to do. The recorder is like a secretary. They write down the main outcomes from any tasks that were assigned. If there has to be a time when the group has to give an answer to questions, the recorder would write down what the group believes those answers are. And the recorder also has to memorialize any decisions that are made by the group. When the recorder gives his or her notes to the speaker then is responsible for talking about the process with the larger class, and the speaker would have to use the notes from the recorder to intervene in the class when they're reporting back or debriefing to the larger group. And the speaker can also be responsible for answering or even posing questions to other groups about the group's process, and that's a very important part of the speaker role. Collaborative learning is learning-centered. It centers on the student or the learner rather than on the instructor as the person who gives the learning. And that requires a little bit of a shift in how people think and approach learning, because generally in a traditional classroom, the instructor is expected to deliver the instruction, but in collaborative classrooms, actually the students are engaging with each other and they're learning through that engagement. So you can see in these concentric circles, there's actually an overlap between the instructor, who's the facilitator, the individual as the learner, and then the activities that the learners are carrying out during the collaborative activities. Looking at this a little bit more closely, the instructor actually designs the tasks and tells what the learning outcomes should be for the course. The instructor monitors what the learners are doing as they carry out their tasks, and also assesses any workshop materials or products, and in the end has a final assessment to ensure that the learning outcomes were achieved by the individual learners. On the other hand, the individual learners have to prepare before the class any activities that they're required to do, such as readings or watching videos. They also have to actively participate in the actual class sessions themselves by doing the activities and carrying out the roles. This is important because the learner is expected to know all of the roles that could occur during a collaborative process so that they can step into that role at any time. They should read the learning outcomes for the workshop or class, and they should assess whether or not at the end they've actually achieved the learning outcomes that they were supposed to achieve. And it's important to give feedback to the group as a whole regarding the group's process, and also regarding whether the group achieved the kind of product that was expected in the activities. A final aspect of cooperative learning is the reflection process. In the reflection process, student learners have to evaluate how well their process as a group went. And often that can be facilitated if the instructor gives a rubric with the criteria that they're supposed to self-evaluate on. And the evaluation can relate to the student as an individual learning substance in the course, but also it can relate to how the group did their work, how they interacted, and how they set up their tasks and the way that they would deliver their tasks. It is always a best practice to have guidelines for the learner and how they participate, as well as for the quality of the work product. And the rubric can be in writing, but the actual feedback can be either written or oral. And it's always important to note that usually in these processes, the feedback is not anonymous. So everyone is aware of who's giving who the feedback and on what subject it's being delivered. For additional information and resources regarding collaborative learning processes, you can visit internationallegalskills.com, which is a website that has a blog that is dedicated to legal skills in global contexts. These two links provide additional information about collaborative skills as well as peer feedback. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you will enjoy the collaborative learning process.